Okay, guys, we'll be getting started shortly. Just waiting for a few more people to join, and we've had a couple of issues with some of the links. So yeah, if you're just happy to just mute yourselves and turn off any cameras or anything like that, we'll be getting started very shortly. Okay, just to pre-warn people, we've had a couple of technical issues with getting set up, so please try to keep yourself on mute. Normally it would do it automatically, but on this occasion it's just easier if we do it that way, and no need to have your camera on or anything like that. In terms of any questions that you have at the end of the presentation, please direct them to the Q&A section, and we'll make sure that they're all answered at the end. So yeah, purpose of today's session is to talk about the risks associated with remote working and the new way that people are working. So I think it's important and probably resonates with most people that working remotely isn't just something that we're doing whilst the pandemic is taking place. It's going to affect businesses long term, and people have thought about strategies that involve, potentially less office space or more flexible working, or whatever direction you may take it. But remote working is here to stay, and of course, taking everything outside of the perimeter opens up to new risks. So just to introduce myself and Andy, so I'm Tom Blackburn. I'm one of the InfoSec leads here at Sapio, and Andy is the head sales engineer over at VARONIS. So I'm going to pass over to Andy now, who's going to run the session, and please do feel free to ask questions as we go using the Q&A tab, and we'll make sure all of these are answered at the end.
Thanks, Tom. Hi, everyone. So my name's Andy. I'm, as Tom mentioned, lead sales engineer at VARONIS. So I've been here for a couple of years. And what I'd like to talk you through today really is just what we're seeing happening at the moment in the world today. And also a couple of the risks that we've seen associated with remote working. One of the interesting ones there being bypassing MFA. It's one of those catch-alls where everybody thinks they're safe with MFA, and we've seen that that's not always the case. On top of that, I just really want to delve into Teams and talk about just how much more we're seeing that in use and how much more difficult that's made things for people. I'd also like to just touch on how we can help with that in a number of different ways, and then talk about our remote worker risk assessment that we can offer you. So really, if we start with what's happening at the moment, this really is reality now for so many different organizations. We have more and more people working remotely and working from home. And this means that potentially there are more unsecured devices and more unsecured networks. People are using their personal devices, they're logging on via home Wi-Fi. And that also means that we're seeing a lot more collaboration. People are working remotely, so tools like Office 365 and Teams are being used an awful lot more. The key thing here is that business continuity has been the thing that everybody has been aspiring to do. And what that means is security has taken a bit of a backseat. It means that files have had to be opened up to everybody for easier access. Maybe requirements to use VPN have been waived. And that means that we have seen really attacks increasing and surging, and also being a little bit more successful. Just a couple of examples of that. RDP exposure to the internet has increased massively in the last few months. So it's up 41.5%. And this is really what we're seeing, is we are seeing that it's that lack of visibility into who's accessing network systems and data as we've moved into this remote working environment. And with that remote working, with the sharing and the collaboration, sensitive data is potentially much higher risk. It can be unknowingly exposed or compromised. With all this extra traffic coming in where VPN logs are being monitored, all the traffic from 365 and so on, there's just so much noise coming through. And it means that so much is getting lost, that yeah, these attacks are far more successful. And this is what we've seen over the last quarter with this. So we've seen a 60% increase in brute force attacks. We've also seen a doubling of ransomware attacks. The previous quarter it was around 6-7%, and we're now seeing about 15% of that. It's not only the increase in attacks we're seeing, it's the increase in the success rates of those attacks happening. With people working from home now a lot of the time, and admins working from home, that recovery from ransomware attacks is much, much harder to do. So the potential of that having an effect is a lot more severe. The potential threat of insiders as well has also increased. The possibility of people being concerned about their jobs and wanting to take data with them as well means that really there is that increased threat as well, and we've seen that grow significantly. So one of the key security things that people put in place is multi-factor authentication, and this is designed to make sure that people aren't able to access the environment. They use their phone or they use an authenticator, and it's that two-factor authentication to make sure that the right person is logging in. And that works quite well a lot of the time, but it's not always successful. And what I want to show you here is just an example of how that can be bypassed. So what we're going to say here is an attacker setting up a man-in-the-middle attack with a fake Office 365 login, where an attacker will trick the end user into authenticating onto a login page. That means they can bypass that two-factor authentication with the man-in-the-middle attack, so effectively capturing those details and stealing the authentication cookie. Once they have that, they can take that and use that to resume the user's session. So they're logging in as if they were the user. They can then essentially carry out any activities as if they were that legitimate user account. So I'm just going to take you through how this would look. So you can see here, this looks pretty real. It looks like the login screen. We've got the secure environment at the top there. The URL itself as well will look fairly real. The user will then enter their credentials exactly as they would on the Microsoft site. You put in your username and your password. After that, you then have the authenticator piece come through and you authenticate accordingly. Once you've done that authentication, you're then redirected to the correct linked document, as we can see here, and that takes you straight into the environment. Now, this is how this is looking to the attacker. They have a number of out-of-the-box fishlets here to pick from. So here, we can see there's the Outlook one loaded, just waiting for somebody to collect those certificates. We can also get a list of the active sessions, including the victim session. We can see that there. And we can then see the authentication cookie from the completed login process. Now we can see this because the attacker was sitting in the middle. They were recording and relaying all of that data between the victim and between Microsoft. So what this then means is that they can take that cookie, connect to the real Microsoft site, and they're in. And they can work just as if they were the real user there. Now, one of the other risks that I just want to talk about as well is this ability to effectively compromise any data just through the malicious use of an Azure app. Now, by default, any user would have the rights to create an application in Azure, not necessarily to authenticate permissions, but a lot of users will. And it's the same way, in a similar way to allowing an app on your phone to read messages and all sorts. And this is what we'll see here, an attacker getting a victim to approve a malicious Azure app. So they'll set up a malicious web application on an Azure tenant. The victim can then be tricked into granting access to that web application. And once that's done, again, the attacker is in. They now have access to all of that 365 data and all that the user would have access to. This one's a bit more straightforward. We can see we've got this document here. You can click to tap and open and follow that link, and that will take you to that website. And this is where those permissions will then come through. And you can see what this is asking to do. Read and write access to mail, read calendars, have full access to files. And by and large, from a user perspective, there's a very good chance it's just accept will be clicked. The attacker can then leverage the app permissions to read any sensitive emails that are there. They've been granted permission to do that. Because they've also been granted this modify API via the app, they can carry out a ransomware attack very, very easily from there. So that's really just a couple of the threats I wanted to go through that we are seeing more and more of within 365. As we've moved into this new world, it's a lot more to keep track of, and users are being given a lot more access than perhaps they were in the past. And what I'd like to talk about now is Microsoft Teams as well. I'll just hand over to you briefly, Tom.
Yeah, so guys, we're
we'd like to run a little poll here. We know that Teams is obviously become a huge platform for people to use for their video conferencing and just keeping in touch with their team in general. So it'd just be interesting to know, out of the people on the call, who is already using Teams, who's planning to put it in place, and yeah, who just anticipates it being a part of their organization. So starting to see some answers come through there. And yeah, as we can see, obviously Teams is going to be relevant for everyone, essentially, in some way, shape or form. And if you're a Microsoft house, chances are Teams is going to become part of your platform. So I think the results are clear there that you know, Teams is relevant for everyone.
Absolutely, and that's really the case for everybody. We're seeing now 75 million daily active users of Teams, and it's incredibly useful. It's really easy to use. It's perfect for collaboration. It integrates seamlessly with everything in Microsoft Stack, and it is designed to scale. It can be used for companies of all sizes, and we are seeing this more and more become the go-to platform for any collaboration and sharing. Now, the key thing to remember with Teams is it's not a data store or a platform. It touches every part of Office 365. So although you know 365 has many different apps and products, data is always stored in these areas. So emails and Exchange Online, user groups and permissions in NAD, personal files in OneDrive, and any collaborative data in SharePoint Online. So if you want to keep an eye on Teams, you have to keep an eye on all these different areas. And what I'd really like to demonstrate here is just what happens when you create a team. So the first stage is creates a new Office 365 group, which will then create Office 365 group and subgroups in Azure AD. We'll then create the team site in SharePoint Online. What it's also doing is creating a hidden mailbox and calendar and Exchange Online. And there's more to this. Team links as well can be in OneDrive. So again, to keep an eye on all of this, you are having to look into so many different places to really see any touch points. These are some of the challenges that we see with that. And we'll touch on this in a bit more detail with a couple of examples. If you want to see who your members of a team are, you can see that in Azure AD. You can see that in Teams. You won't be able to see that when you look in SharePoint Online. Shared links, however, if someone shares a link out, you won't be able to see that in Teams or Azure AD, only in SharePoint Online. And that is after you drill down into an admin portal and eventually see that information. If you want to see just who has access to a site, that will not be visible in Teams. An additional layer of complexity is Microsoft Delve. And this is almost an Amazon wish list of files that other users have opened. So people like you within the company, it will just show you all the different pieces of data those users have access. So if somebody was to compromise an account and get in, that's the perfect starting point to start looking at data and deciding what else you'd like to look at. Then we've got OneDrive on top of this, which adds another data storage location. So again, just the layers of complexity here. Just to make this even more confusing, owners are able to designate co-owners, and they are then able to just expand team access independently. So they can start adding people not just from within the organization, but potentially outside the organization as well. So we're just going to go through a very brief couple of examples here. And what we have here is the compensations team, and we can see we have a explicitly defined team here with Amelia as the finance member, finance manager, and 4 finance team members in the same group. Externally, we have an external lawyer here where we have Margaret, and we have an additional internal employee, but not necessarily a member of the team, in Sandra. So we then create a sensitive file that is then shared via this bonuses channel within Teams. It now means that James and William can access that file. So that file will contain employee information, bonus amounts, and bank account numbers. William, if he shares a sensitive document with an external user in a chat, that file is then shared in William's OneDrive. But again, there's no record of where that file is going. The access that is given to that file is there indefinitely. So that is stored in William's OneDrive account. Margaret has permissions to that file indefinitely. Just as an example of this, it does mean that control really is lost to IT. It starts coming out of IT's hands. This idea of collaboration with minimal friction completely contradicts basic security concepts. It means that end users are able to make these decisions with yet no security experience. If you want to keep track of where your sensitive data is and who it's shared with, it becomes very, very difficult to do. This is not clear anymore. And it means that the privacy by design, that's such an integral part of GDPR, has the potential to just go out of the window. Data is overexposed internally, it's overexposed externally as well. Just a further example of this. Emma, as we touched on earlier, is an internal employee, but she's not a member of that team. But we can share that via a link, and Emma can then access that file. So that's fine, but it's really hard to see where that access is within 365. We can't see where Emma's access at all in a 0AD here. There's no record of it. There's no record of it in Teams either. So it's just a massive hole where we're not sure where that access is. So really, when we ask who has access to Teams data, it entirely depends who you ask. Again, those team members are visible in a 0AD in Teams, but never in SharePoint Online. Because the owners can designate those co-owners, including external guest users, it's another layer that we've already touched upon, but just becomes really to hammer that point home. And the shared links are not at all visible in Teams or a 0AD, just in SharePoint Online. And site-only access isn't visible in Teams at all. So what I'd like to talk about is how we can make this a lot clearer for you and how our risk assessment can help you with this. So one of the things that we're able to very quickly and very easily demonstrate is where your sensitive data is, where it's overexposed and where it's potentially being shared with people it shouldn't. So these dashboards will correlate that sensitive data to the exposure level, so being shared both externally and publicly. So we would know that that file had been shared with external users, and we'd be able to demonstrate that and immediately show you who that was being shared with. Exactly the same within OneDrive. So this is all covering different areas of Teams. So that file that was shared within James's OneDrive when he shared it externally, that would be demonstrated here. We'd be able to see where those sensitive files were. Another thing to touch on here is we are also able to show the age of sensitive data. So if people are sharing sensitive data that's older than it should be, that no longer needs to be there, we're able to identify that and help you remediate that information. What I want to show you here is just, again, how difficult those permissions are normally to see and how we're able to make this a lot easier. So this is that file we talked about earlier, that employee bonuses file. And what I want to show you is just how much clearer we can make that view for you. We can see here that that is classified data, that's PII information, as we can see. And this is all the people that have access to that data. And what we're going to do is just break that down for you and show you how we can give you the full picture of what's going on with your information. So we've got the shared sites here at the top, and this is information that you'd be able to see in SharePoint Online, provided you went down into that advanced view that you would never see in Teams. Again, all the Teams members, we can see those in Teams, we can see those in Azure, we'll never see that in SharePoint Online. So the owners of the teams that we've got set, we can see them in Teams, we can see them in Azure, but never in SharePoint Online. You're never getting that full picture within 365 of what's happening. That shared link where it was shared with Emma from the HR department, we can see that in SharePoint Online, but we will never see that in Teams. So to have that full picture of who has access to what, it's just not something we're able to see without using this to drill down and see everything, all on one pane of glass where we can see the exact levels of access that people have, where that access comes from, so we know who's touching that sensitive data. Now, once we have the ability to do that, we're then able to prioritize risk. So we're not just looking at those files and telling you who has access, we're telling you why they're sensitive. So we're classifying that data, we can see what it is that's causing that data to be sensitive, where those files are stored, and exactly what those files are. Now, the key thing with this as well is we're also monitoring activity. So we can monitor lots and lots of events and billions of events from all kinds of different data sources. And what this allows us to do is not only know who has access, but who accessed what and when they accessed that. So here it's very, very clear what's happened. We can see that a group owner has been added. We can see that a group member has been added. We can see who's carried out that kind of activity there. So just to drill down a little bit more with this, this is what a normal event would look like. So when you're going through and looking at events, this is an example of a VPN login event. This is one person logging into a VPN. So it's just noise. Essentially, to look at that and to try and make sense of that is incredibly time consuming. And having to do that, as we've already mentioned, across all those different data stores, across Exchange Online, Azure, OneDrive, SharePoint Online, just to see what's happening within Teams is going to take a very, very long time. So what we're able to do for you is collect all of those events from all these different data stores, be that 365, be that on-prem, be that your Exchange, or even your perimeter, and bring all of that information together for you. And that means that the events that we're producing are clean events. And not only that, we're actually adding to those. So this here is just an example of a file that's been opened, the device that's been opened from, and when that was opened. But what we're able to give you is much more context to that. And this is very, very efficient and saves an awful lot of time. So we can see here that we've identified that this is an executive account because we're looking at user behavior. We know this is a sensitive file. Although that's not shown here, we know why that's a sensitive file. So we will have classified the data contained within that file. We also know not only the IP address that user's logged in from, but the device name. And we know that if that's the user's normal device. We can see the geolocation if the user's logged in from 365 or a VPN. So we know if that's a usual place for that person to be logging in from, or whether that's somewhere a little bit different. And the key thing with that is that allows us to build these peacetime profiles. So with those clean events and all those meaningful facets, it means that our AI has all the fuel it needs to put this together. So as I say, we've identified David as an executive account. We know he works from the device that he usually works from. We know who David's peers are, and that's really key as well. So not only do we know how he behaves, we know how everyone in his peer group is behaving. We know the data he has access to, but we know if he doesn't use that access. So if he does start touching data we wouldn't normally expect, we'll know that. And that enables us to really identify when something unusual is happening. So those attack scenarios that we mentioned at the beginning, we'll be able to tell if someone is doing something unusual and alert you accordingly. So if someone's logging in from a device that we wouldn't normally expect to see, it's the kind of information we can alert you on straight away, or an unusual geolocation. If he's behaving in a way that you wouldn't expect, in a completely different way to his peers, we can alert you to that and provide you with the tools to respond to that. Again, accessing data he wouldn't normally access, exactly the kind of information we'll alert you to. And again, although it's, as we can see here, the working hours are usual, it's another facet that we can look at. If someone's logging in unusual hours and not working in the way they'd expect, that's when we're going to inform you on this information. So rather than giving you those logs of billions and billions of events and asking you to deal with that information, we're providing all that extra context, we're enriching that for you and making sure that you have all the information you need to act and to protect your data. And really the best way to look at this is to start with a data risk assessment. So this is a free capability that we have where we're able to make this real to you and your organization and highlight all the risks associated with your data. This is across all your critical data stores and all the supporting infrastructure. The great thing with this is it means all those key areas of like overexposed sensitive data, if you've got that stale data outside of retention or any vulnerabilities in either Active Directory and 365, anything essentially that malicious insiders can use to compromise your data and systems, we're able to provide you with a report highlighting all of those risks. We can also show you how all your users are connecting to your data and exactly what they're doing inside your environment. The key thing with this is it's a bespoke document and we're able to provide recommendations to you on how to prioritize and fix all of these issues if we find them, and allow you to make an informed decision on all your data protection, compliance, and threat detection and response across the entire infrastructure. And whilst we're doing this, we're able to give you a crucial insight into how all your users are accessing data in 365 in this new world. This is a very, very easy thing to set up. We would just ask really for a server to be spun up, and we're able to point this at all your data stores. Thanks very much for listening to that. I hope that was useful. Tom, I'll just pass over to you if there's any questions at all.
Yeah, we'll just pass over to the Q&A. So, here's a good opportunity if you do have any questions to send them in. We have had one so far. So the main thing that we need to cover off here is what is required on the custom side to run a free of charge remote work risk assessment. So it sounds like quite a straightforward process, but in terms of what the customer actually needs to do in terms of provisioning a server, things like that, what's the effort required on the custom side?
So it's very straightforward. So we have a prereqs document that asks you to build either 1 or 2 servers to spec, and then essentially there's a download link we can point you at, and all of the roles and all of the pieces that need to be installed will run via a script in the background. So it's minimal effort.
Excellent. And I've got another question here. So ransomware, can one affected user in SharePoint get infected? Can that affect the entire organization? Can the entire organization get ransomware off the back of a single SharePoint user getting infected?
So it would be more, it's not so much that they'd be able to pass that information over, but what they would be able to do, it's about the data they can then touch and then access files and pass ransomware on in that way. So not so much as in they won't be able to then compromise users directly, but if they can plant that file, or if they can create, put that file that generates that application permission in there and send that to other users to open, then yes, there is a very real potential for that.
Okay, excellent. So just to leave you this, if you refer to the chat, you'll see there's a link there for getting signed up for remote work and risk assessment. So if that is something of interest and you think it would be valuable to you, please do follow that link and register your interest, and we can of course get that set up for you. And as I say, completely free of charge, and very, very interesting to get the results from what you've seen here today, but personal to your company. Everybody wants to know, what's our situation, and where are we overexposed? So as your ways of working change, this could be a really useful way to get things kicked off, improving your security stance for remote workers as well. So that concludes our session today. If there's no further questions, thank you very much for your time, everybody. And look forward to joining you on the next webinar. Actually, Andy, can you just stay for 1 second? I've got one more question. If the customer is a Druva customer, if they get ransomware, would their Druva cloud backup be able to save them? Would they be able to roll back prior to that? I suppose it's maybe a question, but better aimed at Druva, and I can take it offline. But I don't know if you know off the top of your head.
Yeah, I might have to take that one offline just to, but yeah, I will certainly look into that. I mean, it would depend entirely on what has happened at that point, but I will look into that one.
Okay, that's fine. We'll take that offline and we'll get back to you on that. Okay, no, thank you very much for your time, guys. And look forward to speaking to you again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.